Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. Simply pour a can in your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like him. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.
We are back here, part 2 interview with Dirk Durham, my good buddy, marketing manager here for Phelps Game Calls, great elk caller. And then even more important than just being a great elk caller, out in the woods, he knows what to do when there are elk there. So the last episode, we answered some questions like how long will he work a bull before changing tactics? How do we determine whether to be aggressive or slow play? We talk on what calls he uses while hunting, when setup calling, you want to be a cow involved in some of those things. So go back and check the old episode out. Now we're going to get into the new stuff. Once again, we're going to take some user questions, some listener questions here right off the bat. If you have questions of your own, feel free to email us at ctd@phelpsgamecalls.com. So the first question I have for you here, Dirk, from a listener: when should you be quiet versus when can you get away with making noise while in the elk woods?
So we'll kind of go back to that locating a bull, right? So we've heard this bull reply 3-4 times. We decided we want to get to that bull. He's across the canyon. Okay. I'm going to travel 90% of the way there to that bull without much regard to noise. We're not going to talk out loud, of course, but we're going to walk, as quickly as we can to cover the distance. But we may be kicking rocks every now and then. We may be breaking a branch. We may be swishing through the brush. It's okay because we're still at quite a distance and we're not worrying about those elk hearing that, If I will say though, if there's some open ground, we want to make sure we try to avoid walking through great big openings, especially quickly, just because let's say one side of the canyon has lots of trees where the bull is at, and then you're on the side that's very sparsely timbered and there's a lot of openings. You should avoid those openings because a lot of times when you're in those trees, you can look out across and see those open hillsides. So you don't want to get caught walking across there. But I don't try to be quiet until I get to that last little bit. When I'm looking at my phone, I'm looking at my Onyx on my little waypoint I put where I thought that bull was, when I start getting about 200 yards from that bull, now I'm going to start slowing down. Start be a lot quieter, because I don't want him let him know I'm coming, right? I want to get up close. I want to get everything to my advantage. I want to have the wind right. I want to have terrain features in my advantage. That way I can get as close as I can, almost danger close, quietly, that last 10% of the setup time. So, and then after that, depending on how the conversation with the bulls goes, will determine my next move, whether I make a bunch of noise like an elk walking through the brush, or if I stay quiet. It just kind of depends on how the game goes after that.
Yeah, I'm real similar. A lot of times, and maybe we take this from our buddies that do more spot and stalk, but in certain situations, especially if a bull is sounding off on his location without us ever having to make a peep, and according to that bull, we don't exist. I'll do the same thing, very, very quiet, all the way to we're dangerously close. Get the wind right, and we kind of phrase that or dub it as kind of that shock and awe. You didn't make a noise. He doesn't even know you exist. And the first noise he hears is, either going to be a challenge beagle or a cow that's right on top of him. So in those instances, I will be very, very quiet. A funny story, or just what my dad always said is, they grew up as rifle hunters, and they'd get on their fancy white, New Balance shoes, maybe stained green from mowing the grass in them, the dad's shoes. And my dad and all of his brothers, they hunted in white New Balances because rifle hunting, especially here in Western Washington, was a game of being silent. Woodsmanship was of the utmost importance. You didn't make a noise. Your goal there was to sneak in on a herd of elk bedded down or in the timber feeding. And you could only do that by being quiet. And I can remember being a young kid, or just getting to elk hunting. My dad looked at me and like, you aren't cut out to do this type of hunting. I made too much noise, too much racket. Of course, I was a kid back then, but it's kind of a segue into when you're archery elk hunting, you can get away with a lot more noise. If you're announcing your location, one thing that naturally is going to come with an elk being there is noise of snapping sticks. Now these 800-pound animals may be the quietest thing on the earth at times, but the majority of the time they will make noise. They're going to step on sticks. They don't care about that stuff because they're just doing what normal elk would do, and that's make noise as they come in. And elk have very keen hearing. They can, a good example, last year I was in New Mexico prior to Steve showing up on our elk hunt. I had watched a herd of elk all morning, watched them do their thing, and then let them kind of feed up to their bedding, which they were feeding down in some low meadows. They would feed up into the timber to some thicker chunks of juniper and whatnot where they could bed. I thought I had given this herd enough ground, never made a peep. I was just scouting. I didn't want them to even know I was there, but I needed to kind of get past their location. I let them get up there what I assumed I could still make eye contact 400 or 500 yards, and I dropped down into the canyon to walk past their location. That bull came charging down the hill, and I didn't figure it out why or how come until afterwards. He ran to my location, and I hid behind a tree just so I didn't get picked off, but he was ripping bugles at a very, very close distance, like left his cows, came down close. And this is just how good their hearing is. I later figured out he could hear my feet, like going through the brush, through the grass, the tall knee-high grass that was in that meadow. And literally I called him in with the swishing of my feet and basically pushing grass out of the way as I walked quickly down the road. So with that said, like, noise isn't always bad. Like, elk will pick up on natural noise that would have been there, whether it was me walking through there or a real elk. And so I'm not always super sensitive to how much noise I'm making, unless, like we said earlier, we're trying to do that shock and awe. We really don't want them to know we're even there. And we're kind of playing on that temperament of that bull is probably fired up and he's going to come in, to check us out. Second question from the listeners: when will you finally give up on a bull and go find another one?
There again, situation dependent. Man, sometimes it's really tempting to give up on a bull, especially if let's say you've been dogging them for quite a while. If we rewind to 2020 and we were hunting New Mexico, Jason, you and I and John Gabriel were hunting together, and man, we were chasing bugles all morning, and it got really frustrating. I was like, man, are we ever going to catch these things? And it was really hard to like pinpoint which direction to even walk. And man, it was very disheartening, and you'd almost feel like, man, I don't know if we should keep following these stupid bugles. I mean, or what are we doing? And we just kind of doubled down on it. You said, well, let's just keep going over here, and I think they're over here, and so we did, and we caught up with them, right? And it worked out great because you shot that really beautiful 6-point. But had we give up a little too soon, like if we'd have got frustrated, like, man, I just don't know where these things are at, or I can't keep up, or whatever. If we'd have thrown in the towel too early, then we'd have never got that opportunity. And another scenario, cameraman Dusty and I in 2020, we were hunting, and from first light, we were on a bull that was bugling. We got down in the thick stuff with him and mixed it up, and he'd come in and he'd leave. He'd come in and he'd leave. He'd come in and leave. And finally, as the morning progressed, it was getting to be about time to where he should probably get out of there and go find a place to lay down, right? So that bull and his cows, next thing you know, we could hear them moving off up the mountain. So there again, looking at the topographical map on my phone, I'm like, where are those things going? We were on kind of a west-facing slope, but over on that east-facing slope, there was a lot of big, deep, mature timber pockets that faced north. And we all know that elk like to bed on a north-facing slope. Why? Because it's a lot cooler. There's a lot more shade. A lot of times there's little wallows or little seeps or some water. It's just a cooler place to be in the daytime, and they're not going to have to get up in the middle of the day and change their bed, especially if it's big, dark timber. They can stay there without having to reposition. So looking at the Onyx, determining that, okay, well, there's finger ridge after finger ridge after finger ridge, about 5 of them in a row with a real nice north face with heavy timber on it. We're just going to start checking those boxes. We're going to go to each one, call into it until we find those elk. So we let them get up and over the mountain. We had an hour or two before it was middle of the day, 12 o'clock. So Dusty and I took a break, had our lunch, cooled our feet, rested up. And when the wind got right, now the thermals are very, very good on that next side of the hillside there. Then that's when we made our move. And so we kind of thought, because we'd heard this bull bugle the day before from the other side of the canyon. So I had a mark on Onyx there too. Like, okay, well, we'll just come across the canyon or we'll just go over the hill where they bedded yesterday and get them. Well, they weren't in that bed. So we didn't give up, and me 20 years ago would have been like, well, I don't know where they went. I don't have a GPS and I've never been here. So I don't know. They disappeared. They must not want to bugle. Well, we just looked at the next spot. It's like, okay, well, we walk a quarter mile to the next pocket. Walked a quarter mile to the next pocket. Nothing. Walked a quarter mile to the next pocket. So like in the 4th pocket, we got close to it. I called, bam, he answers. We found him. And within 30 minutes, we had that bull called in, and, there's too much brush in the way, and poor old Dusty didn't get a shot, but, it worked out great. So I feel like, unless you've really spooked them, just keep on them. Just keep on them until either you kill them or they go to some place maybe you physically can't follow, or maybe you run out of daylight, or whatever the case might be. But don't give up. I feel like people give up way too soon sometimes. Use the tools you have, whether it's the maps or just maybe a strong set of legs. Just keep going.
Yeah, and I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit and stretch the question. So giving up on a bull as far as that morning's calling versus one of the things I get to hear around here a lot is people have their favorite little spot that they hunt, right? They're going to this spot day after day, hunting this specific bull day after day. Around here, our Roosevelts are very, very patternable. They're going to do the same thing. Well, we get stories, or we get to hear the stories of, man, what do I do? I've been in here 5 days. I've got them to bugle in the same spot. And, I'm over exaggerating, but they go to the same spot in the road. They get the bull to answer from there. They go down the same trail every day. And so my first thing is change up your tactic, right? Don't do the same thing. Cause I don't know what the definition of, what is it? Idiocracy is like doing the same thing over and over.
Insanity.
I probably butchered that whole thing. Insanity. There you go. Not idiocracy. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. And so that's kind of where I've go is like, well, have you tried something different? Have you tried from approaching the opposite side or the opposite, creek bottom or drainage, whatever it may be? But you get my point. Like, you've got your butt whooped there 5 or 6 days in a row. Like, switch it up, because it's obviously those elk want to be there. It's obviously they're calling. Like, go switch something up. And then at some point, there are situations where that elk goes to a bedding area that's so secured. And when I mean so secure is it's got swirling winds, it's got inapproachable side hill, whatever it may be. If I feel that my chances of killing this bull are less than 100% on any given time, I'm going to switch my plan. I'm going to go find different elk. Like, don't get stuck trying to kill the same elk, day after day, setup after setup. If you're getting your butt kicked because you've only got a certain amount of days in September, you've only got so many days of the rut. In my opinion, you're better off pulling the plug on. Yeah, we also say don't leave elk to go find elk, but in these certain instances, like I'm pulling up, I'm pulling anchor and I'm going somewhere else. If I'm getting beat that many times in a row.
Man, that's some great information. I feel like people get in that rut, I've heard that same story a lot, man, I've been watching this big bull and I hunted him for 8 days and what could I have done to call him in? And honestly, your first encounter with an elk is your best to kill it. And your second encounter, the odds in your favor go way down. The odds tip towards the elk every time you have that encounter, especially day in, day out, every day in a row. So I'm with you, Jason. If I'll hunt an area one day, if we don't kill in there, but we had pretty decent luck, a lot of times I'll walk right away from that and go hunt in a different spot. I may go 20 miles away to a different spot completely. And I'll let those elk set, especially if I'm not worried about somebody else going in there to hunt them. And then I'll come back in 2 or 3 days. A lot can change in those 2 or 3 days. Maybe there's been some fights happen. Maybe there's been a change in hierarchy of the dominance, between bulls. Maybe there's cows that have all been bred. The last couple cows got bred. Now there's bulls that just about ready to leave and go find some greener pastures somewhere. There's so many unknowns there, but hunting them over and over and over and day to day, they learn your tricks. Just because you're not there, you leave. Just because you're not there doesn't mean you haven't left remnants of your presence. We all take a leak and go to the bathroom in the woods or just walking through the woods, touching things and stuff. We do leave behind scent. And at nighttime, when the elk move around, a lot more freely, they'll find evidence of our presence. So if we continue to just go in there day after day and stink it up, it makes it really hard to kill one of those bulls. And then, back to the point you made about, you go out to the same landing, you bugle off in the same spot every day. Man, elk get so conditioned. I got this hunting spot in Idaho, this big, nasty, gnarly, deep canyon. And there's not been a year that I've stopped there, hike over there, get out on the point and bugle to where I didn't hear a bull, except for this one year. And I'm like, man, the timing is perfect. It's cold. It's just, man, why isn't there not a bull or multiple bulls bugling down in there? And I get to look in there and there's lots of boot tracks. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry that's passed through there has stopped here and called. So I'm like, well, I think there's bulls in here. So I backtracked, walked down, dropped about 500 feet in elevation and got a little bit of different angle into this big canyon and started calling again. And it was like night and day. Bam, answered immediately. And I'm in just a rut fest bugling match with this bull in a matter of 15 minutes, right? So changing your position means everything because those elk get conditioned. They've heard and this was towards the end of September. They've heard every Tom, Dick, and Harry from September 1st till then, bugle from that sweet spot, and probably some even come in that people don't even know about and catch their wind or hear them or see them or something. So if you can mix it up and just try some different places, like if there's elk in there, don't use the same routes to access it. Don't use the same bugle points. Get creative and get in there.
Those are all great points, Dirk. And so once again, if any of you listeners have any questions for me or my guests, please submit them at ctd@phelpsgamecalls.com, and we'll do our best to get them answered. All right, in today's discussion, Dirk, and we could probably spend the next 20 podcasts talking on just this one subject, is setting up. I have full confidence in the majority of hunters. Some of them I would still question, but the majority of hunters can go out there and locate elk, either with glasses, either with location bugles, or shoot just seeing them cross the road or finding tracks, whatever it may be. But once again, kind of the theme of this podcast is we get to hear and listen to a lot of people, whether it's at sportsman shows or whether it's through emails or, social media messages, whatever it may be. But I think maybe if we were to keep a tally, this is probably the most common theme or the common scenario that we get. We're at a sportsman show. You've already can see the person's got their phone out, right? They're getting ready to show us a video of what happened to them last year. They get all ready to show us this video, and they call a bull into 90 yards or 80 yards, but they just can't get a shot. And we already kind of know the outcome, right? We're going to get to see a video. We're going to get to see a flash of an elk or where this bull gets to or whatever it may be. No shot. And then I'm already thinking of, well, why did you set up where you did? There was a brush line 90 yards ahead of you right where it held up. Or, a lot of times, and I've even did it on our own videos, and the more I think back to it, we'll call a bull in, and you get to see maybe its eye guards and about half of its nose and its eyes up, right? Because guess what? That bull got to a spot. He expected to be able to see you calling to him, and he holds up there, and he's not coming any farther. So we're going to spend a lot of time here talking with Dirk about setup and all the things that are associated with it. As you're going over there, what you're thinking about, what you're looking at terrain feature wise, vegetation wise, wind, what the wind's going to be doing in an hour, how to use that wind. And so we're just going to jump right into it, talk about setting up. In my opinion, it's the most important thing that's going to allow us to get a shot at an elk and get a good shot. So, Dirk, let's go through the whole thing. Let's back this all the way up to the beginning. I know we've talked about bits and pieces of this. We've located a bull. We glassed them. Let's say we glassed them across. We're able to get great information. It's 8:00 in the morning. There's a herd bull with a couple satellites and maybe 10 cows, and they're going towards a bedding area. And you can, what's your process? Are you, trying to figure out where they're going to bed? What is everything you're looking at? And then what is your, how are you going to formulate a plan? And I know this isn't exactly setting up, but this all leads to the setup, which in my opinion, matters.
Yes. I think of all those things whenever I hear that bull going. I'm thinking about, okay, where are they trying to get to? Where's their bed going to be? Where are they trying to get? What are they moving quickly or are they lingering? Some days they'll linger around for a few hours in the morning. Some days, a lot of times when it's a full moon, that within an hour of first light, they're in their bedroom. They make their way there quick. So how they're moving, that's definitely going to dictate on how we're going to set up. And sometimes, if they're moving pretty fast, then I'm not even thinking of calling in the elk. I'm just trying to maintain and follow and keep track of them. Right. I'm going to stay with them as best I can and keep tabs on them as they climb the mountain or come off the mountain, depending on where they're going to bed, versus where they fed the night before. And you can, if they're on the move and you're like, okay, let's get set up here. A lot of times you can stand there and waste 20, 30 minutes, and those elk will completely move out of the county if you're trying to set up when they're in transition. So I don't typically try to set up at them times unless I actually have a bull coming my way. Then I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and set up now. But if the elk are moving towards their bedding area, I'm just trying to keep tabs, trying to keep up. Maybe if the terrain is gentle enough, I'm going to try to push my way up towards him hard to where he feels crowded and maybe turns back and wants to come and fight. I've had to work both ways. Sometimes you just kind of push them and dog them all the way towards their bedding area, and they'll turn around and come back before they even hit the bedding areas. But sometimes they just keep on going and they go lay down for a while. So every scenario is a little bit different, but you just have to kind of know when to set up and when not to. And I would say definitely when they're on transition and they're climbing the mountain, you should be climbing the mountain instead of setting up to try to get a shot.
For sure. And if we were to, and we're not going to have good numbers, but would you say you're more likely to call a bull in that's already heading your way versus, one thing, if possible, and it's not always possible, I hate to try to call a bull in back to the opposite direction he's wanting to travel or follow his cows. It seems like it becomes exponentially hard or maybe even into like single digit success versus if I can somehow muster up the energy or come up with a plan to get in front of them and let them continue on the way that they're wanting to go, my odds seem to be way higher. Have you found that, same thing to hold true, like not trying to get them to change what they're doing?
Yeah. I almost feel like if they've already pushed through that area, that's almost like scorched earth, right? That it's really hard to get them to backtrack and come back to that. Unless maybe the herd's been split. Let's say half of his cows are up on the hill and there's half still down below. He may come back down and gather up those cows again, or those cows just may be like, oh, we got to go to daddy, and they'll just run up the hill. But more times than not, it's super hard to get them to backtrack. But if they're coming towards you, if they're already coming towards you, definitely that'd be a good time to try to call one in. And that might be a time to think about, all right, where are we going to set up? Because they are moving towards us anyway. We're on their natural path, on their natural course. Maybe we can set up and call them in here.
Yeah, great points there. And I'm just going to give a little teeny tip there. We talked about early on spotting that bull across. Looking at the bull's behavior, if I've got a bull if I'm going to try to call a herd bull in and the disparity of the bulls and the pecking order isn't so spread out that bull's having to work his butt off in the morning and chase every satellite bull away, like I'm pumped to go try to call that herd bull in. Versus when the disparity gets big, it seems like, and there's a giant herd bull or a very mature herd bull, and he doesn't even really give a crap about the other satellite bulls because they're not willing to get close. Like that one, I'm not so much looking forward to go call in. So, by looking at the temperament and how active a herd bull is and how much work he has to do to keep satellites gives me a little bit of, that's in the back of my mind as I go try to call these bulls in, is just how aggressive he is. And a lot of it has to do with like that pecking order and how, the disparity from top to bottom. So keep that in mind, as you're on your way to setting up, if you can get that information. A lot of times if you just get a bugle back or you're not able to lay eyes on everything, you can't get that. But, a big important part to some of the strategy that we're going to start with and knowing the bull that you're dealing with. So let's say we've come up with a plan. We've located elk. The first thing we usually do is try to figure out, can we approach now? Should we approach now, or we're going to leave them until a different time? A lot of that has to do with the amount of time it's going to take to get over there to get to a good setup, what the wind's going to be doing. Do we need to go set up on the different side? And so maybe we'll look at this as like a nighttime approach. How do you make that decision? Whether you're going to go now, whether you're going to wait for the wind to switch, whether you're maybe going to go get them, in the evening, like what all goes into that decision for you?
A lot of it just depends on, what time of day is it? What is the wind doing? Like you said, how much time do we have left in the day? Is this the last hour of light? Is this midday? Is this morning? But the one thing I will say is like the wind usually dictates everything, typically. And there's, we kind of talked about it earlier. We touched on it earlier quite a bit about, when do you give up on a bull? I may not give up on a bull because the wind is horrible and wrong, but I will wait in the wings and press pause on the game just until that wind gets good. And you have to you can be tricked. You can sit there for 2 hours and think, oh, okay, the wind's good now. And you get up and walk 100 yards and then the wind switches again. I like to have it, maintain, 15 minutes or so, good steady wind, be like, okay, the wind is definitely switched and it's probably going to stay like this for a while. Now it's time to make a move.
We've all seen plenty of gadgets and fads come and go, but here's one product that stood the test of time. Seafoam motor treatment. Lots of hunters and anglers know that seafoam helps engines run better and last longer. It's really simple. When you pour it in your gas tank, seafoam cleans harmful fuel deposits that cause engine problems. I'm talking common stuff like hard starts, rough engine performance, or lost fuel economy. Seafoam is an easy way to prevent or overcome these problems. Just pour a can in your gas tank and let it clean your fuel system. You probably know someone who has used a can of seafoam to get their truck or boat going again. People everywhere rely on seafoam to keep their trucks, boats, and small engines running the way that they should the entire season. Help your engine run better and last longer. Pick up a can of seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls. I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.
All this, we made all these decisions right, and we're getting over to where we want to set up. We've ideally got the wind in our face. We're going to have a steady wind. What is your checklist for a good setup? Go through everything as far as are you setting up in front of trees? Are you standing? What's the terrain and vegetation look like? Are you trying to call a bull uphill, downhill? Go through everything that's on your checklist for us and what kind of goes into those decisions.
Well, ideally, when I'm going for the setup, so I've traveled 90% of the distance. Now I'm in that 10% of the distance left to the bull. So I'm hoping I'm within 100, 150 yards from the bull. That last little bit, before I think I'm danger close, I'm assessing the terrain, right? I really want to position myself on the same topographical line as that bull where I think he is. That way, all he has to do is come side hill to me. I've called bulls uphill, I've called bulls downhill, and I've called bulls side hill. But the good thing about having them come side hill to you is typically, your thermals are going to blow up or down. So you've waited till the wind's good, but let's say a big cloud comes over and cools the hillside, and all of a sudden you get a swirl of wind. automatically just changes directions and starts blowing back downhill. If you're not on that same contour as the bull, that could be where you get fouled, right? So I really love that. That way I've got more of a crosswind I'm hunting in rather than having a strong one in my face. Strong one in your face is good, but sometimes that means you have to try to call the bull up or down. And if I had my druthers, if I'd rather call one up or down, I'd definitely rather call one up to me than down. It seems like more often than not, whenever I'm trying to get a bull to come downhill to me, it's a tougher game. They have the advantage of being able to see you. They do have momentum and gravity on their side, but for whatever reason, I think it's that whole sight thing. When they're above you, a lot of times it's a little tougher to get them to break free. And for me, it's been a little tougher for them to get to break free. But I've had them climb up the hill right to me a lot more often than we're coming down. But ideally, though, I really want to try to get that bull on that same level as me before I try to call him in, because then in case there's a snafu with the wind, then we're probably still good.
Gotcha. Are you in front of brush or behind brush, next to a tree, kneeling, standing? What's your preferred as far as before you make your first call? Like, how are you set up? And then, do you, one of the things, do you clean out brush under your feet so you're silent? Like, go through, in front of brush, behind brush, where are you physically at during this setup?
Right. Well, before I get to the spot where I'm actually physically going to stand, I'm assessing. Okay, I've got my contour line right. I'm on the same contour as this bull, but now I'm picking out shooting lanes, right? And I'm looking for terrain breaks, and I'm looking for topography breaks, and I'm looking for shooting lanes. So if I got like 5 really good shooting lanes, like, man, I can shoot to 70 here, and I can shoot to 50 over here, and I can shoot to 60 in this one. I can shoot up to really long distance in about 5 different shooting lanes. Man, I'm in the wrong spot. I am set up in the wrong spot, because that bull, whenever they get to that edge break, whether it's the edge of the trees, edge of the brush, meadow edge, or maybe they've climbed up a hill or they've come over a ridge, that's where they're going to hang up. So the first place that they can stand to see where those calls are coming from, that's usually where they're going to hang up. So I want to make sure if they come in and hang up, it's going to be close, right? So if I'm solo calling, I want to make my calls and then move up close to where I think they're going to hang up. And if I'm with another hunter, which is really great, makes it a lot nicer most of the time, is I want my shooter to be set up at that terrain break or that topography break, or that ridge. Just that way, the first place that bull is going to set up, that hunter will have a good chance to shoot at him. So then second, okay, once I've identified that, okay, I've got an okay shooting lane. I can shoot to 20 yards through this one. I've got kind of a crappy one. I can shoot 5 yards, and then there's one a little bit better. I can shoot about 10 yards. That's ideal. A bull is going to have to come in really close to see me, or he's going to have to come out by the shooter to take a look over to where the collar's at. So that's what you want. You don't want to have a whole ton of shooting lanes. You want to have it, pretty tight. And then I'm going to look down at my feet, right? Okay, I may have to stand here for quite a while. I may stand in this spot for 5 minutes. I may stand in this spot for 40 minutes. So I'm gonna look down at my feet. Pine needles. Are there a bunch of pine needles under my feet? Sticks. Am I standing in brush? I want my back up to a big tree or something that's not going to show my outline. Let's say I'm going to blend into, like, there's a great big bush and I kind of blend into that. I always turn around and look behind me, make sure there's not a whole bunch of daylight. I don't want to be silhouetted with a big daylight background. I want something to break up my outline, whether it be a tree or a big brush pile. I want to be in front of that tree or brush pile. I'm going to let my camo do my work. For the guys that don't wear camo, that's okay too, because you're wearing earth tones typically, right? You're going to stand in front of something and let it break up your outline. And then you're going to stand there very motionless. You're not going to stand there swatting flies or swatting mosquitoes, or pointing this way or pointing that way or scratching your nose. If you have to scratch or something, that's okay. You just have to move really slow. Slow movements. Those are hard to pick off in the woods versus a white hand moving around, swatting flies around. So you want to stand there motionless. I don't want any twigs, any branches, anything under my feet. And a lot of times I look around, it's like, okay, if the bull's going to come in to my left and I can't quite get a shot, maybe I need to be able to take 2 or 3 side steps over there to get a shot. I want to make sure that's clear. There's no branches or there's no twigs in that way. I can just take 2 side steps quickly, quietly, and then get him. Right. But if you stand in like a big bunch of branches where any movement is going to make a noise, that's going to tip off that bull. Another thing I've found over the years that's really fouled me up is setting up with a big windfall in front of me that has long branches, or one that's kind of like, it's not all the way on the ground. Let's say it's waist high off the ground and then there's branches. Man, I get away from those windfalls and not set up by them, because every time bulls will walk up on the other side of that windfall. And I think that might be by design. If they know they put a windfall in between them and their rival, they know that rival can't just sabotage them, right? They feel like that's like a safety net. Or maybe even a predator. Like a predator wouldn't be able to, come through that windfall very easily. So every time there's a windfall in the way, they always walk up behind it. So if I see a windfall, I get away from it and redetermine where I want to set up. I don't kneel. The only time I would kneel is if I would be able to if there was too many branches at normal standing level, and if I had to kneel and I had like really good shots because there were no branches low, I might kneel then. But that would be the only time. I typically don't kneel. In my young days, I kneeled a few times, and every time I would get, the bull would come in where I didn't think he was going to come, or I would kneel for so long, my feet would fall asleep and I'd get so uncomfortable. Then I was moving around and shifting around, and then a bull would come in and see me moving around. So I like to stand more often than not, unless there's, the foliage of the trees or whatever makes me kneel.
Yeah, I was going to add that tip. As you're setting up, trying to minimize movement, which can be an oversight. But if you're looking the wrong direction, I always like to set up with my left shoulder, at least facing like the extreme right, the right, as far right as I expect that bull to come. Because as a right-handed shooter, I know I can lean, I can turn my body very, very easily to the counterclockwise direction, but I can only go about 10 degrees further in the right. And so being able to get a shot, I like to always like overemphasize. And that just, it seems like it's way overkill, but it's just trying to limit any movement as that bull comes in an unexpected spot. We do our best to guess, but you just never really know where that bull's going to end up. And so by being on your feet with your shoulder facing them, it gives me the ability to shoot pretty well, 90 to 120 degrees to my left and be pretty natural, already in the right position for shooting a bow and everything. So it's just little teeny pieces that we've picked up. And then also wanted to add in, as you're setting up, like Dirk said, you can't, I made the mistake setting up in brush. You've got a 25-inch arrow hanging out in front of your bow. You can't move. You can't move without making, any noise. And so we've just found up, set in front, let the brush break up your outline, and go with that. I do want to touch on wind a little bit. And this comes from a lot of personal experience, a lot of, calling elk in. We always talk about keeping your nose into the wind, right? Which is great. It's fail proof. But with that said, there's a lot of conservativeness built in with that wind being directly, on your nose. I'm just taking a guess at it. It's probably not a true 180 degrees, but that elk would have to circle you a long ways probably to get that wind right. They can probably go for sure 90 degrees. They can be off to your left, and they're probably going to have to go another 45 degrees behind you to finally pick your wind up. Well, what this led to a lot, especially as a solo caller, was the opportunity given for a shot was typically frontal. I'm not going to debate on the podcast whether what you're going to do with frontals, but what happened is, naturally an elk wants to smell whatever's calling to them. They're trying to wind check you as the caller. So as you go to set up, I would rather have that wind, let's say, hit my right cheekbone or my right cheek, and almost, so now we're not playing the wind as perfect. The wind's no longer on our nose, but we've set up with a consistent enough wind that you can predict more accurately which direction you expect that bull to go. So if the wind, let's say, is hitting our right cheek or our right ear, somewhere in between there, we can now guess with pretty dang good certainty that bull is going to get to within 60, 70, maybe 80 yards and start to do a circle to our left, which is a great tip for, especially when you're doing two-person calling. We used that in New Mexico back in 2020, Dirk, where you were calling, I went forward and then to the left, and the wind was blowing up the hill. And so it kind of drove that elk into our position at a more broadside shot versus, if I would have gotten perfect line with Dirk on the direction you were calling that bull into me, I would have been presented with the frontal when, as he turned and came up that hill. So use the wind a little bit as a steering wheel and don't necessarily use it to be perfect all the time. There's some leadway in there. And by using a little bit of those angles, you can get yourself presented with a little bit better broadside shot than having to make a tough decision on a frontal shot.
Yeah, that's great information. Another thing I'll say too, like getting set up for the shot, is as soon as you determine that's where you're going to set up, knock an arrow right then, right there. This is where I'm setting up here. I immediately knock an arrow. I can take my ranges. I can range everything later. But if a bull all of a sudden just comes in, I don't know how many times bulls will unpredictably come in a lot quicker than you may think. If you're not knocked up, it's really hard to get an arrow on your string when a bull's standing there and then get a shot off. So first thing I do, knock up an arrow, and then I clean the ground around me after I'm knocked up. And then after that, I go ahead and range everything and settle in. I usually range. That's usually the last thing I do, just because then it's all fresh in my mind too. And I may have to, my memory is about as long as my pinky. So I as I'm set up there, if I have, time to make a few more movements, I may range after I've done everything right. Then I may range again a little later just to refresh my memory.
I want to touch on real quick. A lot of times we're doing our own calling for ourselves, but there are times where we're calling for buddies. We always talk about kind of the fight or flight and being aggressive, especially when you're trying to call a herd bull or be within that zone. How far do you want your caller back? Because in my opinion, you may be taking your caller, which is the threat to that bull, out of that zone. But how far do you want your caller to be back, and why?
I like my shooter and caller to be within sight distance of each other, especially if you guys haven't really hunted together much. Let's say this is the first time you've gone hunting together, or maybe you're both new at hunting and just haven't really hunted with partners or done a lot of calling. Man, it's really imperative, in my opinion, to be within sight distance of each other, because your shooter, they're right on the front line. They may see some things that you don't see, and if he can make a motion to you like, "Hey, man, stop calling," or "Call more," or "Back up," or "Move forward," he can kind of coach you along too of what's going on up there that you can't see, and vice versa. Let's say maybe your shooter hasn't really done much calling of elk or been involved with calling elk. You may want, you're the quarterback of the situation as the caller. You may want to move up, or you may want to hand signal like, "Hey, move up," or "Fall back." You may want to give him some signals, but if you don't have sight of each other and he's being quiet and all you're doing is calling, man, it's really easy to get spread out. And then man, we're on two different pages here. The elk is coming and your shooter's kind of gone off somewhere else, or wow, we need to move up now. Let's go. There's certain times when you make that decision, we have to move up and we have to move now. If you don't know where your shooter is, that's a problem. That poses a very big problem. So I like to keep us,
For sure.
within seeing distance. But I will say there's an exception. So let's say the bull's hung up and he's raking across the draw or something, or up on top of the ridge. He's talking, but he's raking. He's not coming. That's a really great opportunity for you two to agree to say, okay, shooter, you sneak up. You go up there, sneak up on that bull when he's rubbing or raking his antlers on a tree. Instead of just sitting there being tight. Let's say you've been calling for a while. You don't think he's going to come any further, but he's just standing over there raking and raking. Man, you're crazy not to send your shooter ahead and sneak up while he's preoccupied, and let that caller stand back there and just, keep him going and let your shooter sneak in.
For sure. One thing I wanted to add to setup too, and this gets a little bit more into calling, but it's one of my favorite setups because it's like pulling the wild card out, is there are just special setups where you've got multiple herds that have come together, and it's kind of that rut zone, these elk, and those are those magical setups. You can set up 100 times, on these same elk, but you get, similar to, we've talked about it a ton, that New Mexico 2020 setup where there were multiple large herd bulls in one location. Those are those magical setups where you just want to be a part of it. You want to be involved and be ready. Like you said, that's definitely the situation where you want to have your arrow knocked. But I don't really know where to go with this, but there have been multiple times, 2016 Idaho, 2020 New Mexico, Tyson's Idaho bull in 2018. There are times where if you can approach a situation, be fairly silent and just kind of sneak into these rut zones, you almost, I don't want to say you don't have to do any calling, but you can almost sneak in there and just let the chaos of the situation work in your advantage. So, it's not necessarily on how to set up, but I guess it's to recognize those opportunities when there's multiple bulls bugling and going at each other. You just have to somehow find your way into those situations because it's one of those few magical times that we get to experience in the elk woods, and it's usually pretty damn good for somebody trying to arrow one of these bulls.
Yeah, I found myself in that situation last year in New Mexico. We heard the bulls from afar, and man, we just moved in. I literally put the calls away until we got, we were seeing legs in the under the trees, right? And if I had it to do over again, I think I would have taken a little different line, from the movement of the elk at that point to where they were then. I felt like they were going to keep moving, so we were still right directly behind them. I feel like if I'd have known they were going to keg up for a little bit on that little knob, I would have pulled off and went circled above, or not above them, but get up on that same topographical line and came in from the side and put myself in a better position. Because, again, they were above us. They had the side advantage. We could only get so close without getting picked off. And then we started calling at that point, and man, we almost made it happen, but it just didn't quite happen. But, and maybe I shouldn't have started calling. Maybe I should have just shut up and just let things unfold too. Cause, let's face it. I think, we love calling elk. We love the exhilaration. We love the chase. It's so fun, but the spot and scout guys probably kill bigger bulls every year than the guys calling. So that's probably the truth of the matter. So, maybe don't get stuck in such one mindset, be able to pivot if you need to. If you think, this is one of those times to shut up and not call and sneak in, yeah, do it. And if that don't work, then pull the calls out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's just, those are places where you just fly on the wall, take it all in, and it's usually chaos. So let's say we've got the setup perfect. We've gotten location, the bull is 100 yards away. We've got our setup. We've got the wind right. We're set up 30 to 40 yards away from the terrain break. We're set up that same distance from a brush, line. We've cleared out all of the hang up locations. Now all we have to do is figure out how we're going to call. How does your calling change, let's say young satellite versus medium satellite versus a herd bull? And how are you going to kind of finish off this setup with your calling based on what you think you're calling to?
I just try to as far as the size of the sound of my bugle, I usually try to just match what I'm dealing with. So if the bulls kind of sound mediocre, their bugles aren't super nasty, I try to bugle the same way they do. If it's big herd bulls just blaring everything they got, then I usually pull out that card too. Because I've tried both. I've experimented with different tactics over the years. So big herd bull, I'm going to bugle like a little wimp, and then he won't be intimidated, so he'll want to come and chase me off. But I feel like I've had less success with that than anything. I feel like that bull hears me. He's like, "You're kidding me, right? You're a joke. You're not gonna. You're like probably a 4-point raghorn. I'm the king of the mountain. I'm not going to be concerned with you." A lot of times I even had them where they wouldn't even answer me. But man, when I'd turn up the heat and turn up the volume and sound really nasty, give them some really nasty big bugles, boom! It's all of a sudden I'm speaking their language, and they're like, "Hey, shut up down there." Maybe I become a threat at that point, and then you kind of get in their head a little bit.
Yeah, when we used to hunt Idaho all the time and some of the burns and stuff, we would locate or spot, satellite bulls that were 500-600 yards away from, let's say, the main herd, the herd bull or the more dominant, satellites. And it would just be the smaller satellites, but maybe there was a bull in there we wanted to call in. And a lot of times we could hurry over there. And one thing, usually I'm the same as you. I've killed a ton of, very young satellite bulls way back in the day, and we use just straight herd bull tactics on all of that. I think they're fairly curious. It's almost like they know, like they go and check things out for the herd bull, or they just come and check you out anyways. So we've used that with great success on satellite bulls. But if we know we're targeting a satellite bull, that's the one time I may go over there, do all of the same stuff. We're still setting up the same, making sure wind's right, everything's good. But we may just lay on a ton of heavy cow calling. Those satellite bulls may not be interested in coming over and running into a bull. They may, if that's the case, they're just going to keep following the herd. So we will switch, on young satellite. I've even found that the more mature satellite bulls that are just looking for an opportunity to cow are even easier to call in sometimes than those very young bulls, because they're just wanting to stay with the herd, with their mom, whatever it may be, where that more mature satellite bull, he's just looking for his chance to breed. And so that will be the one instance where I do go away from kind of our aggressive, get close to the herd and just kind of pour on a lot of cow calling and get those satellite bulls to come into our location. And like I say, we were in burns a lot of this, so we were able to see, like, the more we cow called, the faster they kind of ran or scooted over to our location. So that's the one time where I seem to change up my strategy, but I know what I'm dealing with. I know exactly what I've got. And, but other than that, I'm the same as you, going in, getting close, being fairly aggressive. And like I say, I've got enough, the proof's in the pudding that being aggressive and calling the herd bulls will turn up a whole lot of satellite bulls.
Yeah, no, I like it. And one thing to note too on that, like, it's been my experience, and maybe you could chime in here too, but a lot of times when bulls come into cow calls, that last little bit, that last final approach before they come in, sometimes they'll just come running right in, but a lot of times they'll break off and then they'll dip and try to get that wind at the last little bit. So knowing that, if you have, let's say you got 2 or 3 buddies with you, make sure you set up with one guy or gal downwind, 40, 50 yards. They may feel like they're not in the game at all, but if you're just cow calling, a lot of times that's deadly, because that elk's going to go down low. That young bull is going to want to see if that is actually a cow that's in heat, or maybe to see if there's another bull there that hasn't been bugling. He's going to scent check that, make sure he doesn't come up there and get his butt whooped.
Yeah, that we've seen the same thing where they'll circle. Like I say, you typically, there's been a few bulls that haven't because we've played the wind too perfect, but typically every elk we call in, aside from one, has always tried to go downwind and check wind as soon as possible on whatever's calling to them. So yeah, they're going to dip and dive. And a lot of times one of the downside to calling in with just cow calls is, especially if you can't see in a burn, you don't really know what's coming, how fast they're coming in, if they're coming in at all, right? You maybe had heard a satellite bugle, or you spotted them and then you go try to call them into timber, you're really in the dark. Like, maybe I'm sitting here. You're not paying as much attention. You're moving more than you should because you have no idea if something's coming. Because a lot of times when you're laying on heavy cow calls to a satellite bull, they just won't make a peep necessarily, which is for me, being, very impatient. It's tough for me to sit there. So yeah, cow calling's tough. They will split. And, on those sort of situations, you're going to have to probably give it 30 to 45 minutes, before moving, just because you're not going to typically get a response.
Yeah. And there's been times too, whether I've been bugling to bulls or cow calling, and they've been pretty reactive, and you sit down and wait that hour or something. Maybe you decide you want to take a little nappy nap. Be careful. There's been times you wake up from your nap and there's a bull standing there, or they're busting off because they walked in and seen you laying on the ground. So, sometimes it just takes them a while to get there. You just never know, especially in that really thick country. You don't know what's coming.
Yeah, great tips. And hopefully, just by putting a little bit of thought into your setup, looking at your shooting lanes, looking at where you're at in relation to terrain breaks and vegetation. When we say that, you can really boil down terrain breaks and vegetation breaks to when can that elk expect to see your calling location? That elk that's calling to it, when can it see it? And when is it going to stop and reevaluate the situation? That's what you're really looking at. And then by your different calling strategies, hopefully, by setting up, it will bring you more success this year. Dirk, give us one more tip to kind of close out today's discussion, to help, elk hunters out there that are maybe struggling or just need a good tip heading into this year.
We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but don't give up. It's super easy to kind of give up on a bull. Like, they've moved out of the area, you think, and just don't give up. Or, sometimes 3 or 4 days of getting your teeth kicked in from bulls that are just, they're smarter than you, which is most of them for me. And don't give up after a lot of hardship. It seems like once you kind of hit rock bottom, that's usually when things turn around. So expect that. Expect to have some highs, but have a lot more lows. But know that it'll come back around. And don't give up and go home, because if you go home and it's your September vacation, you're just going to end up painting the house or doing chores, mowing the lawn, something. I mean, it's better to stay in the woods and dig in a little deeper and a little harder and be like, okay, I know this sucks. Maybe we need to just dig in and stay. Now it's going to get good because it's been so crappy so far.
Yep. Yeah, and to add on to your point, most good elk hunters or elk hunters that are successful every year, they're resilient. They're not going to give up. And a lot of them can draw from past experience. It may be tough if you've never found success late in a hunt. But those of us that have, you realize that it may have been a hunt where you've heard no bugles. It may have been a hunt up to that point that you've had no call-ins under 100 yards. But we've all been there and like, well, we just killed the best bull of our life, or we just had the greatest experience on day 8 of a 10-day hunt, and it was going so horrible up till then. So it may be tough to draw from that if you haven't been there, but trust us. We've had, guys that are supposedly supposed to know what they're doing, like me and Dirk. We've had these situations play out where we're just like, man, are we ever going to be able to even call an elk in to, the next thing you know is you're packing out a bull and, having a good time. And just like that, the hunt switches. So be resilient. Don't give up.
One more thing I'll throw in there, stay on track. It's easy to get distracted. Here a few years ago, it was the last day of season. It was middle of the day, middle of the late afternoon, actually. And I hadn't heard an elk bugle yet that day. And I'm like, man, I am getting desperate. It's the last day. I've been having a terrible season. And I'm driving along in my truck, relocating the area. And I look out and there's this bear in this berry patch, just standing there looking at me. And I stop and he just stand there staring at me. I'm like, I'm going to shoot that bear. And then I kind of slap myself back into reality. It's like, I'm not bear hunting. Okay. I could have shot that bear, definitely. But my elk hunt would have been over at that point, right? Because I'd have been taking care of that bear. I would have got a bear for the year. Great, cool. But in my mind, elk are greater than bears. especially in elk season. So I'm going to go ahead and say, well, I'll see you later, Yogi Bear. I'll come back another day for you. But anyway, I stayed on point, and I ended up calling in a bull literally the last 15 minutes of shooting light on the last day, notched my tag. Had I messed with that bear, I would not, I can guarantee you, I would not have been in that position, that exact spot to call that bull in. I'd have been behind the gun. So stay focused, stay on track.
Yeah, great tip, Dirk. Good luck to everybody out there, and thanks for joining us, Dirk, and good luck to you.
Thanks. We'll see you next time.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. Simply pour a can in your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.